wants to join us on YouTube. Yes, whenever you're ready.
We are on, huh? So let's call the meeting to order. Like we have a quorum, we have folks both here and away. Do you know if we have any guests?
There's no one in attendance.
No one's in attendance, so this is not a riveting conversation we're gonna have.
Well, you don't know that yet.
To the public, I say.
They don't know that yet either.
We do, since we are hybrid, we do need to do
Roll call by vote or by hearsay.
attendance. Yep.
You want to call the roll?
Let's see if I can do that. All right, I'm going to start with the people on the screen because that's easier for me. Ron Allen.
I am here. Can you hear me?
You can, yes. Jean Marie Caterina.
Sorry, I had planned on being here, but it has been a disaster.
I'm obviously here because I'm cranking at you guys. So there you go.
Rick.
Here.
Ron. I already said Ron. Ed.
Here.
David.
Yes, here.
Tom.
Here.
Anton. Ernie.
Here.
All right. We have Jamie sent out the minutes from the September 20. No, it couldn't have been September. That's the agenda. The August 25th meeting. I've had a chance to read them. I have no issues with them. They captured the meeting nicely. Is there a motion to approve these minutes?
So moved.
Yeah, moves. In a second.
Second.
Thank you. Any discussion on those? Seeing none from both here and away.
All right, we roll call. Ron.
Vote to approve.
Ed.
Yes.
David.
Yes.
Tom.
Yes.
Yes,
Yes.
Ernie.
Yes.
Unanimous.
very good. Thank you. And Jamie put together a agenda that seems like we could have a robust discussion around a couple of topics. Is there any other agenda item that any members wish to bring up at this time that we might be able to slip in? Seeing none, you want to move forward with the agenda?
Sure. So we're going to start off with just an update on the solar ordinance. So the town council had their first reading of the ordinance at their September 1st meeting. I feel like it went well. They referred it to the planning board. Planning board had their review of it at their meeting on Monday. And it's my understanding that they had a favorable opinion on the ordinance language. There were a few people that spoke. Some people were in favor of it, but not next door to their property and things like that. And then there was another person who has been providing comment all along saying that there's concern about allowing large-scale solar in the Higgins Beach area. And so staff have tried to address that by putting together a map showing eligible properties that was included with all of the materials that went to both the council and the planning board. And it's written into the ordinance language that there's a threshold for properties, and really based on that threshold, it looks like there might be 1 or 2 properties in the Higgins Beach area that would be eligible for solar. And I don't see solar going in Higgins Beach. It's not the highest and best use for land in that area. That the land down in that area of town is far more valuable than to put a solar array on. But it's still a concern of one of the residents. So we'll see how, if any changes are needed based on those comments. It's my understanding that there will be a public hearing at the council's September 20th meeting.
It's after.
Oh, yeah, sorry, it's October 6th. Yeah, I was looking at the wrong date on my notes. October 6th meeting. And I'm not sure if they'll have the second reading at that point or wait for the following meeting for the second reading and vote on the ordinance.
Yeah, and
Either-
I don't know either. But yeah, just so you'll know, the council's, the way the wind's blowing, it looks good. I do know there was some question about screening. And then Chris Chiazzo, Representative Chiazzo, sent me an article the other day. I haven't had a chance to read it yet, but it's from the Kennebec Journal. Supposedly the city of Augusta is working on for utility scale solar arrays, a little bit more stringent rules than we're thinking about regarding buffering and distance from residences and whatever. But, you know, for what it's worth, I think, in my opinion, I think the opinion of some other counselors, it makes sense. Let's get this rolling. The planning board obviously has input on anything that's put up. There are rules, you know, when it comes to setbacks, they have to do with zones, where they're located, there's buffering and whatever in there, and there's performance standards. So I don't see a real concern with this, just so everyone will know. So, and I haven't heard any, I frankly haven't heard one counselor say they don't like it. So there you go.
Yeah, thanks for that.
So fingers crossed.
Yeah, planning board did do a favorable recommendation back. There were a couple of folks that spoke against it. There's a little bit of that NIMBY in there, and one gentleman spoke about health hazards and things of that nature, but you're always going to have a little bit of that. People are been on people's homes for 40 plus years, and it's a proven technology. So I don't think we should hold up an ordinance because we have to study health issues. It's been around long enough.
Rick, I'm sorry, could I ask a quick question based on that? I know that as chair of ordinance, when anything comes up about cell towers or telecommunications, I have to shut down any discussions on health right away because federal and state government doesn't allow. They're like, that's not a reason, because the lobbyists obviously have been very successful over the years regarding that. My assumption is there's no such thing with solar at this point, but I was going to defer to you because you probably know more than I do.
Well, I just passing on that one comment was made about that, and when it came my time to talk, I pretty much said what I just said. So I don't think it's going to be a situation where this is going to hold up the process, but
No.
it's nice. That same gentleman spoke that it was kind of the idea that this ordinance was even out there was unbeknownst to him, and prior to that, Jay gave a little bit of a narrative about we've been working on this ordinance for over a year, and you know our meetings are public and our agendas are posted, and I just reiterated to that effect that the sustainability committee did not do this in a silo, and we have been totally transparent, and we've tried to provide support to the ordinance committee when they've asked for our assistance.
Welcome to my world.
So that's that. I will send out an invitation to you all for the council's meeting on the 6th. That will be a hybrid meeting. So if you're able to participate, it can be in person or remotely. And again, that's when there will be a public hearing, and we're waiting to find out. I think Jay Chase, our planning director, has touched base with Tom to see if he has a sense of if it will be just the public hearing or if they'll have the second reading for the ordinance at that point as well.
So just because you have a public hearing after it's been brought back doesn't mean that there's going to be a second reading.
Well, there has to be a second reading. That's when the vote happens.
When the vote, but it doesn't have to be at the same meeting.
Yeah.
I got you. Okay.
I think, you know, if there's a lot of comments and the council feels like revisions are needed, then
They'll hold back.
They would hold off.
Okay. They wouldn't vote on it then, because if you vote on it, then you can't, and it goes negative, you can't bring it up for a certain amount of time again.
Mhm.
So rather than kill it, we probably wouldn't vote on it.
Not unless a counselor who voted no changed their mind and asked for it to be reconsidered. I think it has to happen at the very next meeting, but that's stretching my parliamentary procedure knowledge.
Well, we'll let Robert worry about that.
All right, so we can move on to site plan review ordinance if.
Please
folks are ready
do.
for that. All right, so y'all had some homework after the last meeting to kind of look at, I will try to share my screen. Let me see how I can do this. Had some homework to look at the commercial entities that were in the draft table that was provided. Sorry, I can't multitask. Here we go. And give some thought to which commercial uses would be most likely or most useful to have EV charging associated with them. So hopefully everyone can read this, and it was also included in your packet. So the draft table, after the last meeting, I went through and updated the residential uses based on the conversation that we had at our previous meeting. But I didn't make any updates to the commercial uses. So you can kind of pay no attention to the numbers that are included in there. I just want to get us to the point where we're looking at commercial and not so large on the screen.
I have just one comment on the residential,
Mhm.
and that's in senior housing, which also hits 100%, even though there's employee staff
Mhm.
in that one. And so that feels excessive to me, because I
Yep.
don't think we need 100% staff spaces.
Yep.
And also for hotels and motels, I think we need them for the guest rooms, but not for staff.
So
Not 100% for staff.
if you look at the standard for the hotels there, they don't separate out guest versus staff parking. It's just the requirement is one space per guest room. So I think that the assumption is that
Staff.
staff
teleports in.
will fend for themselves, or they will
Okay.
park in a guest spot, or maybe there's a designated, Angela, if you have any insight on that, but this is pulled
I
directly
guess
from.
that surprised me. I guess we've never reviewed a hotel. So I guess they were assuming that they're never gonna be at capacity. Or hardly ever. I don't know. That does seem odd that they don't incorporate, like you said, for staff. I guess I didn't realize that.
I'd still like to go in high, and if the ordinance committee starts whittling down, at least we're in a ballpark where we
Well,
feel good about it.
I'd kind of like to go unreasonable too. I was just talking to somebody associated with UNE over in Portland. And the way Portland's ordinance is set up, they're needing to install several $1 million worth of chargers like right now. Without, like, the chargers that they have are underutilized and they're needing to spend that money.
Mhm.
And so I think that puts a really weird spin on the situation. I would rather not be in a position of requiring it.
And I think, to your point, I think senior housing is, different too, in the fact that, what we're hearing is they base it on, like you said, the number of units or rooms or whatever, but they also is an assumption in there that not everyone is gonna have a car. So that factors in how staff can park. So that one might be a little easier to figure out, to get a percentage of, because we're actually looking at a site right now, Redico. It's coming through the downs right now. That's a senior housing. And I gotta believe it's a big building. They gotta have a lot of staff. So I'm wondering what that percentage that they assume, because all these guys have done it across the country to know probably what percentage of their residents actually, or the average, have cars. You know what I mean? So if you look at it that way.
Yeah, I think it's worth at least considering that, because I don't want us to be in a position of requiring 100% for places that are like temporary.
Yep, I think part of the thought on the senior housing though too was that the kind of seniors are the largest user of EVs as well. So,
And I think that we should, like, places we expect people to live and stay overnight, I think that we should be preparing for 100% penetration. But not for staff. So I totally agree with the residential
Yeah.
part of it, but just not with the associated staff.
Okay, yeah, that
I,
makes sense.
I was gonna comment on that too. When we talked about the whole,
They, because that came to the planning board, that project, 2 nights ago? And I can't remember how many parking spaces and how many rooms there were. I'm thinking there was 143 apartments in there, and there was right around that number of parking spots.
Because what's the zoning say? Who's in the-
So it's 1 parking space per dwelling unit and 1 parking space for each employee based on the expected average employee occupancy.
So it doesn't, okay.
So I think they did take into account that not
Okay.
every resident will have a car, and it was stated so by that gal, can't remember her name. But I hear, and the varying stages that we're asking for to have it EV capable is so much cheaper now than if we require something less than that, and we're not gonna be around to see it, let's face it, but there could be a time when, the Jetsons are around again.
So I mean, we could specify 1 EV space per dwelling unit and not worry about employee parking. We can have a caveat on that one for senior
Yeah.
housing.
Because, yeah, if you're not including the ones that are, just do per dwelling unit.
And I think senior housing is going to change over time too. In Maine, we have the aging in place. And, they're saying that now the average age, they're starting to see a decrease in the average age going into long-term care because of the continuum care. They can go independent living and then go assisted living. And just because you're assisted living does not mean you can't drive. But the fact that people start to enter these facilities at a little younger age should be in our thoughts too.
Before we move too far into this, also, I just want to share that I sat down yesterday with Angela and Jay to start talking about this stuff. And Jay had the really good observation that this is going to require a pretty involved stakeholder process, since this will impact the development community pretty significantly in Scarborough. So his recommendation is public meetings and inviting open to the public, obviously, but also targeting specific folks that we want in the room. So a couple developers of single family households, house lots, developers of multi-unit and commercial developers as well, just to kind of.
Should we do that more in a workshop form before it goes into a public setting, a public hearing kind of forum?
Yeah, it wouldn't be an official public hearing. I think it's really just a stakeholder engagement process where we try to get people around the table and kind of.
So it would be
share
more
our
of a
thinking.
workshop kind of thing.
Yeah, for sure.
Yeah, okay. Well, that does make sense. However, I'm still interested in what the opt-out fee might include, because they can opt out. They don't have to do it. And there could be different stages of the fee based on the 3 levels that we're asking for. So if they don't want to do 80% and only want to do 60%, well, then what that opt-out fee look like for that 20%? Where then that 20% would go somewhere that would serve, the bigger community. So there's that piece that we haven't really talked about.
That's a good point. Yep.
So I know I'm always going to go in high, with the assumption that with the opt-out, and there's some push and pull as the process goes.
So if we are kind of good with that, we can look at commercial development.
Well, there's 2 schools.
I was wondering though, the column header, number of parking spaces required. For single family, it says 2 for each dwelling unit. Is that true? For new construction in Scarborough, you're required to have 2 parking spaces?
It could be like a 2-car garage.
It could be, but I mean, there are some houses, usually older, that only have a one-car garage.
But then they have
And
space
there's-
in the driveway as well,
Right,
and that's
the driveway.
considered two
That's the
spaces.
driveway, too, yeah.
Okay, and I'm thinking like downtown Portland, not Scarborough, but downtown Portland, you could buy a single-family house in downtown, and it has no parking, just street parking. There's nothing in Scarborough that's like that, or even
Well, I
allowed
will
to have
say
that?
the closest we get to that is the Downs, and they count some of the on-street parking, say, as you go in, I think, Carriage Walk Apartments, they count as part of their two spaces, what some of the on-street parking.
So would you be required to put EV conduits for the street parking?
That's a good point. There's, I mean, that's, the only place in Scarborough that I can think that has that,
Yeah,
but
but I mean,
it's
that's,
progressing that way, yeah.
I think the
so-
answer would be yes, that we need to be asking conduit ready for all.
All street parking?
expected-
Or
No,
on
all
street
expected-
parking?
On
all
street parking.
expected dwelling parking, and if that's at the street,
How they
then it
count
has
it,
to
right.
be.
Yeah, I think we should do it as they count it.
Yeah,
Because that's how they come in with planning board, and they show how they get to their two spaces.
so we might be prepared to answer that question, you know, if
Yeah.
builders come in and say, you know, the Downs, we don't have two parking spaces for every house, or
In a lot, but.
But they have to
They
come
do
to
it too,
the,
right.
to the planning board with the sufficient parking spots, whether it's done in a lot or on-street parking. They can count that as well.
so the number of parking spaces required is a known
It's in the
description.
ordinance.
Yeah, this
It's in
is
the ordinance for
existing.
any new housing, and we're not talking about retrofitting back to any existing
No,
house,
this is new.
just new
new.
construction, okay, all right, that's a question.
And I will, I guess, say also, as we get into the commercial, we see it more, and they have the required parking. The planning board has the ability to waive the parking standard to a certain point. So, we've had some experiences where, commercial development comes in and says, this is our process, this is, you know, here's our staff, here's our hours of staff, how they cross, and, or even looking at other facilities they have around, they can do counts and say, I only need 75% of what you're requiring for parking, and they can have that conversation with the planning board, and there's been instances,
Sometimes
Quite
it's
a
worked
few.
out, sometimes it hasn't worked out.
Exactly.
None
So-
such as an example where it didn't work out.
Yes, but I guess I'd throw that out there. There is the possibility that the planning board could say, okay.
And there's cases where they can come in with more,
Yes.
like
and
a
they
health
justify
club, for
that
an
too.
example, that has
Yep.
a known pattern, and sometimes that can be granted,
Yeah.
that more can be added.
and so this then would apply to whatever spaces they come out of that.
So whatever the.
It would be a
planning board
percentage then,
provides,
so
yeah.
therefore it would come out of whatever the final planning was.
Yep.
Anything else on residential?
No, I think that's totally appropriate.
Schools. There's
Yeah.
The header that says targeted at faculty staff parking spaces. But the high school is still at 60% of total spaces. And I'm not sure we even need to go that high because all of these are employees, no one's staying there. So I think that's just the,
I just think that as we go down the road, more and more kids that drive to school will be driving EVs, because that's what mom and dad are buying.
and they shouldn't be plugging them in at school. Like we don't as a community.
Well, if it's charged, who says they can't?
I don't feel like we need to supply that. They can charge that at their house, and I don't feel like we need to set up for the taxpayers to pay the electricity for kids. that-
No,
Well, they don't
I'm not saying
necessarily
that.
need to be, but
Yeah.
also chances are for students who are driving to school, it's not a long commute for them. Like for the staff that are working there, it may be, but for most cases, the kids are going to live in the same town where
Yeah,
they go to
Yeah,
school.
that's a fair point.
So there shouldn't be much of a need for them to charge at school.
I'm all right with 60% total.
I'm all right with 60% for the elementary and middle schools, but I don't want to target 60% for the high school. I don't want to target 60%. I mean, would be 60% of staff and students. And I'd rather target 60% of staff.
So there could
Well, what would be the alternative to 60%?
Whatever we wanted to do.
What do you propose? You say you don't want to target 60%, and what do you propose?
I mean, for the high school, I just wanted to say here, 5% of staff parking, 5% of staff parking, 50% of staff parking. I mean, I think 60% is high. That's a different question. So I want to separate the two questions. The first question is whether we're.
Well, I don't think we have to spend a whole lot of time because how many schools are gonna be built in Scarborough?
Yeah,
from on out?
That's true. I mean,
there you go. Thank you.
We,
Sorry,
But I
Ron, I
think-
missed that you had your hand up there.
No, so just to clarify, I think every item in here is new construction, right?
Yes,
So it's a new high school being built. These are the requirements. No retroactive to anywhere.
Correct.
that's correct.
Okay, so on all of the businesses, problem with saying a high number of conduit ready, but everything else after that's a business decision. If you don't want to have any EV at your business, that's your decision, I believe. And I'll leave it at that.
Yeah, I could see a couple different kinds of businesses that wouldn't want EV. You know, you have gas stations and Pronto. You know, they're encouraging fossil fuels. I mean, they want fossil fuels. To come in and say you must go EV is counter to their whole business. And I think it's too aggressive, I think. It causes, bad feelings if you're a fossil fuel type industry and somebody's saying you must go EV. It's unnecessary, I think.
I'm okay with requiring some conduit, but I agree that letting the market choose where the actual chargers get installed feels like it makes sense. Like, I feel like we're seeing that happen in the
Yeah.
places where it makes sense. And I think it's hard to predict where the battery capacities will be going over the next 5 to 10 years, such that we may not, again, I don't want us to pay to overbuild. Like, I want this to be available. I think requiring conduit in every parking, like a place for something in every parking lot we put in at this point makes a lot of sense. And I think having capacity at larger buildings makes sense.
But then like smaller businesses, the economic model for Amato has a very small parking lot because they really don't want people to stay long. They don't want
turnover.
part-time, even the part-time employees, I'm sure they're told, just have mom and dad drop you off or, whatever. Dairy Corner, if you've ever seen that place, it's very hard to find a parking place. They don't want anybody to stay there for a long time and charge. So in certain kinds of small businesses, I don't think it's in their economic interest or their economic model to have cars of any kind, and they don't have sufficient parking. And then the last thing I wanted to say too is Scarborough has a lot of seasonal businesses. So if you have a small business that closes down in November and doesn't reopen until May, would they even want an EV charging station in their parking lot when they're closed and they're not there? Is there any liability for business owners who are closed down and somebody, tampers with or has an accident with an EV on their property? So in those cases, I think, probably may not even want EV for those kinds of businesses that are shut down.
Mhm.
So for most of this commercial stuff, I really want to be targeting some portion of staff. people who may be coming from a distance and maybe staying for a while. For customers, it really feels like it makes sense to, like, businesses could choose to install them if that's part of their model. But I really appreciate the way that those have been clustering at grocery stores, where I know where to look for them. I'm likely to be staying for on the order of a half an hour. I've been thinking this through as I drive around town. Like, I don't see any need to supply customer parking. I know we're not doing retrofitting, but I just need to be thinking about the places that I go. I don't see any need to have customer EV charging in like the Oak Hill, like Ace Hardware and all of that kind of stuff. I don't see any need to have customer EV parking at, or at doctor's offices and places, dentists and stuff like that. I just don't see the customer coming and charging there. It just doesn't even make sense to me as an EV driver. But to have some number of spaces wired, at least for staff, feels like it makes sense, and the actual business then could choose.
So you're thinking for staff parking, at least EV ready, so it has the conduit and the capacity? Or are you thinking EV capable where the conduit's there and if the business decides to provide that to their staff?
I feel like it might be a mix of EV ready and EV capable.
So are there any types of commercial uses where you would hope to see EV chargers installed? So you mentioned grocery
Malls?
stores, so retail space.
I don't mean just retail space, like concentrated retail space. So like, even if I'm thinking about the Target, Bed Bath and Beyond stuff there, I don't see customer EV parking in that context.
Any others?
I just want to say that you could build something today and it's a Target, and tomorrow it could be a refrigeration warehouse. There's change of use of buildings over time, and if you're not messing with the parking lot, then you're not going to do it. And so we need to have some level of flexibility there.
So you're saying that EV ready or EV capable?
I think at least some EV ready and some capable. And whether we actually require, it's tough because we even charge developers recreation. If they don't put a swing set in, they can opt out.
Yeah.
Okay, and so these kind of things build infrastructure for future, and I don't want to stymie the future. I don't want to, for the sake of being, nice to developers today, I don't want to cripple what the future landscape looks like in terms of whatever the building's gonna be down the road.
And I'm not trying to do this for the developers. I'm just trying to do this, like, there is an environmental and materials cost in doing things, like, as we're seeing newer vehicles, usually most of those have ranges of a couple hundred miles.
What does it cost to put in a parking lot?
That's a loaded question.
No, I'm not.
I mean, it can range.
The reason why I asked that is just running conduit, is that a significant extra cost for a developer? Or is it just more of an incidental?
I'm gonna say that there's such a vast range depending on the site and what they're doing, that it can range a parking stall from $2,000 to $4,000 or $5,000 a parking stall, because you're talking about with utilities and grading and gravels and pavement and all of that. So depends on how they, so then you kind of multiply
Okay,
through.
so if a parking stall costs $5,000, how much do you think the conduit would add to that cost? In other words, are we
Probably
talking about something that's material here?
It's probably like, I'm gonna say $10 to $30 a foot, depending on what they're using.
But I think then you start achieving economies of scale. If all
Right,
builders
that's what I think
know,
that's what I'm
if
saying. I
all
can't
builders
come up with
need
a
to
number
know that they
because
have to do it, and it's
because it's-
consistently applied,
Yeah.
then, prices will come down. There'll be more suppliers,
Right,
there'll
if
be
you're
more
putting in
vendors.
1
there'll
foot
be-
of conduit as opposed to 100,000 feet of pipe, it's a totally different number. So that's
I
what
guess
I'm
I'm just
saying.
wondering, what is the materiality here? I mean, is it like 2% or 1% or 5%? I mean, is it a deal killer to say we want conduit in a new?
Not
parking
when
lots?
I've heard Rick talk about this in the past, when you have an open trench, it's, very minimal to put a piece of conduit in, because it really, it's about labor and excavation, the equipment, and all of that gets added into the cost of the pipe. If you're taking that out and it's just the pipe, it's a much less cost, right? So it's just,
And usually they build it in different levels.
right,
So there's different surfaces as you go up and, you don't have to put it 4 feet down in the
Right.
ground.
Right.
And so it just becomes, you lay it and then you put crushed rock over it and then you put smaller crushed rock over it. Then you do a base case pavement and then you put a top coat on and you got it in there. So you really actually didn't dig a trench. It was just put in as part of the layers.
right,
Yeah,
so that
so-
saves your cost.
I
So,
mean, if it's de minimis, then it's not particularly material. You spend more time and money arguing over it rather than just doing it, and then you've got it for the future.
My question is that where we want to put the world's copper? Is
Exactly.
that where we want to put the world's copper, under all of the parking lots in Scarborough?
before
Well,
we
I don't
answer
think all
that
the
question,
wires going copper today.
Ron has his hand up. So Ron, if you
Sorry,
want to
Ron,
jump
I can't
in.
see your hand.
I have two questions. When we say we're gonna put down conduit, do we specify to where? Is that to each parking space, or is that to a central location in which additional something or others can be expanded out? And my second question is, have we defined what new development is? Is there a specific law that says what new development is? And reason I bring that up is, let's take a look at a currently empty business. And I'm thinking of the barbecue rib placey, whatever it was, that's out by Cabela's, that's empty, and somebody comes in there and says, I'm gonna turn that into a hat shop. Is that a new development?
No.
That's a change of use.
Okay.
So
So
Now,
they
if-
don't have-
if-
they would not have to do anything to go in and remodel that building to make it a different use.
if they did any kind of expansion or anything kind of on the outside, if it could trigger new development depending on the scale of that change.
Well, I
But if-
mean,
If it's remodeling on the inside, that wouldn't trigger any of this.
and the reason I said from a barbecue place to a hat shop, that means you're probably doing something to the outside. To
Yeah, but
change,
you're not really doing site work. You're not doing, you're not messing with impervious surfaces.
You're not
That's-
either ripping the parking lot or making the building itself bigger or anything like that.
okay, that sounds fair to me, that they don't have to go in and, oh, I want to put up a new sign. Oh, well, that's something outside. You get to remodel all the parking spaces too.
Yeah, there are triggers and thresholds in our site plan review ordinance that kind of define when that happens.
Had one last night, or Monday night, Ron, the SMA building, the Southern Maine Agency for Aging is
Yeah.
being converted into a Katahdin Bank with another office. But
Right, yes.
that new bank is also getting an added drive-through, so now there's a canopy and everything being part of that. That triggered a site review, because they're actually gonna have to do site work for that. If they were just doing a remodel of the building, then it probably wouldn't have come to the planning board.
So, and the conduit goes to where?
Well, as it's been told, it's incumbent upon the applicant to demonstrate they are in compliance with the ordinance. So
What does the ordinance say?
that's on the parking, and you have to prove that you're meeting that. And however you do that, obviously following code and all that kind of stuff, it's up
So
to them.
But I think. the
You're
question is,
saying
you
that
have-
the conduit has to
Well-
go to a parking space? Multiple.
Let the developer tell us that.
I think the conduit needs to be placed in a way that it could run electricity to X number of parking spaces to power EV charging stations. And however the developer wants to accomplish that is up to them.
You could put a head out there with 4 hoses and do 4 parking spots,
Do
4
we need to
courts.
spec-
You
do
can
we
put
need
a
to
Duke
spec-
out lights, you can put a single.
do
Let
we
them,
need to
let them,
specify
that they're
or is it
meeting the percentage.
specified somewhere?
Does that need to be specified somewhere? Is that your question? At this point, I think we're just talking conceptually, so I don't know that we need to kind of
Okay,
work that out today,
all right.
but
My gut sense is that the goal needs to be 20% of staff, long-term availability, like able to install chargers for 20% of staff.
and you're thinking for all commercial entities, or, because this is the thing, we've got a lot of different categories,
Yeah, I see
Of-
that.
commercial uses.
And as I go through them,
I like these percentages, and I'll just be on the record to say that.
yeah,
This is a great start.
Right.
And I mean, it may mean that we bump down, as we discussed earlier, we bump down what is required to have them actually installed. And so that, like you were saying, that would be a business decision if the owner wants to provide EV charging, they take that next step and actually install them, but at least there's conduit there for them if they want to take that. So it's easy, it's not a huge retrofit, and, even if, and it's ready for, when they want to install it by having a small percentage with the electrical capacity already in place.
Maybe I'm wandering in the woods here. But do you think it would help the conversation if we could just come to some conclusion on what we want in terms of capability? Just have, I think that's maybe 100% capable for everywhere. And then the amount that would be installed is a separate conversation.
I think that's actually something we talked about in general, like actually to back up and zoom out a little bit is one of the things that Jay talked about yesterday and we were trying to get out of Jamie was a little bit about what is your goal or the ultimate, like here, I feel like we're working a little bit backwards by saying, okay, what's a pizza shop need?
Yeah,
What's this need? And rather than starting with the conversation of, what do you guys want to see, like end goal, like back to your point of like Deb coming out and saying, I would like to see 20% of all staff, right? Or something to say, here's the big picture, our ultimate goal, what we would love to see, this is what we want Scarborough to look like. And then how you get there is we get into these weeds, right? To have some sort of policy on our ultimate goal.
yeah. But if you have.
And it sounds like that's something you're kind of.
Yeah, I think if you have the capability, you can always install the capacity.
So
But
that
if
could
you
be
don't have the
100%,
capability, you
right?
can
So-
never do
Yeah.
any variation of capacity from either 20% to 100%.
Yeah.
But you've got to have 100% of capability.
And I think that's what South Portland and Portland thought. I mean, because they went with 100%.
And that's why I suggest that for new parking lots, you put in the conduit, because it's basically a piece of PVC. You're not putting anything in more than a piece of PVC, right? You're not wiring it, you're not doing, but you've got the capability.
So that's where I guess to have the conversation with this group is that's a good maybe starting point for like, okay, here's a low bar. This is something we want to see is that 100% of new development is to your point of saying the conduit has to be in there, right? So
Yeah,
that's part of,
capable, I guess, is.
right. So we get to that point. So you kind of can work backwards from there, right? So,
And then capacity, of course, is based upon things that Deb is talking about, like what do you see as your projected staffing, who's going to be using it, what do you expect to have it? Then that's comes into the capacity.
So conduit to each parking space? Or you think then we apply a percentage or?
Well, I think to Rick's point, you could have 100% capable by having conduit to 4 parking places if they were contiguous or something else like that.
Say again, how can you have 100% if you have only four spaces?
Because that one charger that you're powering with that conduit can charge cars on 4
Can
spaces.
power 4 spaces.
So you're like.
So you're only bringing it to that one area and you're not doing it to 4 separate spaces.
So how many spaces are we talking about? You're saying in a parking lot that has only 4 spaces?
If you have a parking lot with 4 spaces and you put in one charger that has 4 cords,
Right.
you're only putting in conduit for
One charger.
one charger.
You're
So let's
electrifying.
just say it's going in front of 1 space. You don't have to put conduit in those other 3 spaces, but that is 100% EV capable.
But see, I cannot envision a world where we need 100% of the parking spaces to ever be electrified.
I agree. I agree.
But that's part of the capacity. That is part of the capacity question. But if in fact you needed that, you're not going to be able to do it if you haven't run the cable, the conduit to do that.
Well, you would be able to. You're just gonna cost you more. It's
Yeah,
gonna
you're
cost you
gonna
more.
have to dig.
And that business said, oh, in hindsight, I should have done it, but now, because everybody's driving an EV and I'm not getting customers because they can't charge here, I gotta do something.
But how many times have you been in a place like my house, for instance, where I wanted to have a cable run for TV and I couldn't? They gave me some static because they said you don't have a conduit, right? And I think that's what the business owners are going to confront. They're going to say, okay, I moved in, I'm going to do a home healthcare thing now. I need more chargers. I can't do it because these idiots who built the parking lot didn't make it capable for this.
Yeah, well, then you don't lease that space, do you? You go somewhere else that did. And so that business said, shoot, I can either put it in to get that leasee or I lose a leasee.
But my point is, if you're building a parking lot and you're spending all this money for it, and the conduit is not that expensive, then why don't you just do it?
So you're in favor of just going 100% down
100%
the road?
capable, not 100% installed or
Right,
any other.
I get you,
area.
I get you.
Just have the
Well-
ability to do it in the future.
And I think that this might be a good talking point or point of info to talk to our development community about, and get their.
And
Thoughts on
it's simple, you know, it's really simple. It can be described in 2 sentences rather than like lots of different permutations and combinations. That's the only point. I'm just trying to look for a certain amount of simplicity here.
I'm with Anton on this because from the very beginning of our discussions about development and possible EV use, we were talking about basic conduit, while the thing is being built, being the most practical level of things to do in the beginning. And the other thing that I think is going to change the picture is the market forces. As more and more EV use comes into play, even though to Deb's point, we don't really see the whole world being EV, but it is changing so fast, I don't think we can predict it.
Well, I've been driving EV for 8 years. And I've plugged in at Hannaford on one weekend trip to Augusta. And I've plugged in a handful of other times away from my house. And even if 100% of people are driving EVs and some of them are driving further distances, like, I just don't see this getting beyond 20% of a parking space for, like, unless someone's living there.
Well, and
I just
as
don't-
battery capacity
I just
improves
don't
and
see
things
even
like that
paying
too.
for PVC for 100%. Like, I don't see utilizing the petroleum and the PVC piping for 100% of parking spaces. 20%, I'm in. 100%. I mean, I'm not gonna die on this hill, but it just
Well,
seems dumb.
if I, as chair, just make this suggestion that we kind of arrive at a certain percentage, try to assign what we're thinking if for capability, ready, and having it installed, having a charger. I'd like to get this to long-range planning first and let them take a look at this and see what their thoughts are. Because they're the ones that guide the overall, what Scarborough looks like. And of course, they're charged with comprehensive plan and having that vision and really prepare for land use. And so I think they should be able to, get their heads wrapped around this idea, because I'm guessing they need to be involved. And then we could actually go to the developers and say, what are your thoughts? And see if we can't mesh it together. I don't know if I'm sold on 100% down the road or down the column, but I'm not in favor of just doing 20% down the column.
I would be more in favor of just one or two rows, rather than trying to parse it so finely and say, all these different kind of businesses. I think just look at something uniform, simple, and understandable, and just say, if it's a parking lot and you're building it in the future, it should have conduit.
If people are gonna live there, 100%. If people aren't gonna live there, 20%.
I just think if we don't have to your point, if we don't have ready and ready to go with the charger unit, and we have a impact fee that they could pay to get out of it, they'll just get out of it and they won't do anything. And then we lose the opportunity.
Ron has his hand up.
Yeah, I go back to somebody mentioned that, oh, well, you put one conduit and you can do 4 parking spots. Well, I'm a developer. Hey, I think that's 8 parking spots, because they're gonna change the charging station to be able to take a battery pack. Well, maybe it's 16 parking spaces because there's 16 battery packs that you can slap on a car. How do we know at this point in time how much conduit is needed?
They would have to design it for the current technology.
And the burden of proof is on them. If they say we're putting this conduit here for 4 spaces, then that gets signed. I mean, that's a plan note that's put into the plan, and therefore they own that. So even if they wanted to come back and say, oh, well, that's not what I can do. You put it in the plan that conduit will serve 4 places. You have to make that happen. Whether you have to make new conduit runs, that's on you. But that's the way it works. The burden of proof is on the applicant.
All right.
Where does the conduit originate?
Probably from wherever the power source is coming from. In some cases, they may be able to even drop, God forbid that there's a pole there, because I don't really like poles, but they could actually drop another feed down right from that pole and right in an island, and boom, you can throw in the conduit there, or you can come from the building, all different ways. Again, the proof, the burden's on the applicant.
A lot of times parking lots also have lights, right? Like.
Oh, yeah,
and
that's
Things like
common.
that, so you've got to run a conduit for the light posts, so it does double duty. I mean, it's not, I don't think, it doesn't seem like a really big deal to.
Is anybody here opposed to the idea of putting conduit in? I mean, I think that's common ground, right?
There are
We all
100%
agree.
spots in commercial properties. Again, I'm not gonna die on it, but it just seems like a waste of material.
Well, maybe this is a point where once we get feedback from the development community, this is an area where
We can do
we
some
make some
tweaking.
adjustments.
Sure, that's fine.
I looked over the percentages and I thought they seemed reasonable to me based on the facility type. And what that use is at that time. Now, remember, strip malls are usually a developer that owns that whole land. So he's making a decision on a parking lot that may affect 5 businesses, but we don't know what those 5 businesses are gonna be. It could be a dental office and it could be a beauty salon and then a hardware store. And then 3 years later, it's 3 different businesses.
Yeah, so it's
So
important
you
to
don't
have
know.
it. Yeah, it's important to have it there. Yeah.
So let's take it upon put it on the applicant at the time, what is the facility type that they're building? And I think we have enough broken up divisions that it should, that structure should fit in one of those boxes. And then we can always have other. And it's as determined by the planning board.
Yeah, everyone loves to see that in an ordinance.
I know that would turn Marie's head.
I was waiting for her to come off mute.
Then the Linda Blair had moved there.
Is she awake?
Yeah, I'm surprised.
I think Jean Marie passed. I think she passed out. She's awake. We can't even hear her.
Are you talking to me? I'm sorry, I just got a text that I had to answer.
Oh.
When
A multi.
I have a meeting norm that you put technology aside. That's a meeting
Yeah, I
norm.
know I should, but that's why I'm not in with you guys. I'm multitasking. Sorry.
That's the way you get out of it in virtual world.
Did you have a question for me?
No.
No, we were just making sure you were still with us.
Oh, I'm listening. I'm listening, obviously. So
And this is being recorded.
Yeah.
Yes.
that's fine.
Jean Marie, what are your thoughts on taking this where we're at and maybe delivering it to the long range planning to see if they had any input from their perspective?
I think that makes sense. I'm on long range planning also, so I get to listen to it 18 times. But yes,
But then
no, that makes sense.
I'd like to take something that we have and at least start that process, because look how long it took us to get the solar, and we're losing opportunity today
That's true.
on getting stuff done. So rather than us try to solve that, let's hear from other stakeholders so that then we can make a recommendation to the ordinance.
I think you're probably gonna hear the most pushback is obviously the development.
Yeah.
Is it better to engage in them as early as possible, just to try to kind of kick the tires and saying, okay, here's the biggest issues that they had, and we try to address that?
Can we get them here in the next meeting?
Because I'm just wondering if long range planners have full agenda out quite a ways, and to
Right.
your point, going to waste time. They're also, you're gonna finally get to them and they're gonna say, what do the developers think? it'd be nice to have maybe some.
Well, that's a good perspective. And then you're out there in the trenches, so.
We also would talk about like maybe Setco could help in that kind of.
Yeah, get
formulating
Karen.
How to bring that kind of community into that stakeholder group into a conversation or get their feedback.
Do you think we could get some?
I would agree with Angela on that. Get the developers invested, involved, get their feedback. Because otherwise it's going to bite you in the posterior down the line. Because they'll come back and say, what the heck? You didn't get us involved early. You didn't this or that. And there's be a lot of pushback. So yeah, I definitely agree from a purely political point of view that you want to get the developers involved. So.
Well, and also to your point, I'm sorry,
No,
to your point in other things, when we talk about like updating the codes, building codes and things like that, and the pushback we always get is, obviously the cost. And I think what's really helpful and informative was how you had put in the past kind of costs together and saying, well, to go from this code to that code,
The incremental
the
cost.
incremental cost, right? And to, I guess, talking about like the cost of the conduit, things like that, I think they might be able to also provide, well, you forgot about this cost or that cost. And so it'd also be helpful probably so that by the time we get further along, we know, yep, we've thought about that. And here we're thinking it's pennies, this is how we figured that. Or is, yeah, this is real money, but we won't need to invest in the community, right? So to know what you're getting into in that, and I think to have the developers sit down, it would be helpful to kind of know what we're asking as far as costs go, right? Like we're asking you, yes, to invest more into your properties, right? So what that means.
Deb?
I feel like the other stakeholder group is the EV drivers. Is there some sort of EV organization of the car manufacturers that has like a better sense of the vision of?
Well, I think GP Cog could give us some guidance because they're kind of in that space with dealing with that and municipal. Ron, you wanted to say something?
David.
David.
No, that's all right.
It's the masks, it throws everything off.
Yeah, the mask. I'm wondering if the appropriate thing for this committee to do at this early stage is to make a statement of principle of some kind that says the Sustainability Committee encourages, and you can add many words to it if you want, but a forward-looking approach to EV charging capacity. And to that goal, the first logical step is to require conduit installed in, I don't know how you put it, surface areas at a time when it's the least expensive. That's a minimal standard to suggest to developers that says this isn't going to cost us an arm and a leg. And then we've got a lot of great ideas going around the table, but we can't settle that today. And if in order to keep our role in this active, we should make a general statement, as we have with other things, that says we've talked about this and we encourage this as a sustainable practice, and here's the first step.
I agree.
And
Yeah, but that's also in our comp plan. It says that.
well, we can pull directly from the comp plan as part of that, kind of like a executive summary mission statement kind of, but Jay specifically asked for a policy memo and kind of putting down on paper our approach and where we're coming from. So part of that would be kind of the overall goal of this process. And then talking about why we're saying 100% for residential versus whatever the percentage we're looking for commercial, and putting down the group's reasoning for making those recommendations. And I think that needs to definitely happen before we kind of try to pull together stakeholders so that our message is clear.
And I think our message will be clear also if we refer everybody back to the comp plan. The developers aren't going to sit down before coming to this meeting and look at the comp plan. So if we have our mission statement out there like, we've done our job today, but we're gonna have to come back and do a lot more work later.
Well, I'm sitting here Googling EV charging stakeholders, and there are a bunch of things that one can read to try to get a sense of what work has already been done. And I think that's probably worth doing, and I'll try to find some time to sort through a few things.
You pressed that.
I
and-
will draft a policy memo and have it ready for you all for our next meeting, if that works.
And then maybe we could schedule, I'm just bringing in the developers before we're going to long range plan does make sense.
Yep.
Since, as we discussed. So looking at the timetable here, would staff be ready to engage with stakeholders, the developer community, in a month with a policy statement and some percentages that we have already kind of formulated in the chart and say, okay, we want developers come in and you have that information ahead of time, come and tell us what your thoughts are. We should also probably include something about impact, the fee.
Mhm.
So that they have a way to, there's something concrete that they can either say, well, we can live with that, or that's ridiculous. But give them a chance to have a talking point.
Like there's a little sense of urgency because we're bumping up against holidays, Thanksgiving and Christmas. So if we were gonna do much of anything that's gonna be constructive, it's gonna be in the next couple of weeks. I don't know if we could do some of this in parallel and get the policy statement out for review before the meeting and then engage with the.
Yeah, that's what I'm
developers.
more or
Is that
less
what you're
saying.
Yeah,
Well,
I agree with you.
I'm thinking I feel like we need to meet again before our meeting with the developers, but that doesn't mean that we can't start planning the meeting with the developers. So I'm thinking like, we'll maybe target the first week or two of November for that meeting, so before.
So take it offline from a committee meeting and make it a workshop with
Yeah.
developers?
Yeah,
That way we could phrase it as a workshop.
right.
I like that. I just want to get moving.
Yeah, because if you haven't come up with, you were saying you want to roll out a policy, which no one's seen yet, or it hasn't been drafted yet. You're also talking about your opt-out fees, right? Which
Mhm.
doesn't sound like it's been crafted yet. So it seems like there's still a lot of work. And yeah, you would want to meet again. You wouldn't want just to rely on staff.
So we would have a meeting in 4 weeks with all that information, and then hopefully you've already engaged with them saying, okay, so we're looking 6 weeks out to get a meeting with the developers, a workshop with the developers.
Yeah, and I mean, that timing seems a little quick for me also, but if we want to, I mean, there's always the time period between Thanksgiving and Christmas that we might be able to target as well. I just feel like, as Angela said, we haven't pulled together kind of the policy statements yet. We haven't pulled together the in lieu fees. I feel like, we're a little bit all over the
Mhm.
board with some of this. And so I think we really need to narrow and make sure that we're, as a committee. we're
So
all
what are
on
you
the same
comfortable
page.
with? Obviously,
Well, I
we're-
guess, and I would just add one more thing is that I want to make sure when we go to the trouble to try to get those developers here at the table, which I think might take some work to get their attention. Because it's gonna get their attention when it goes farther down, but to get them early at the table. Or that we make it as productive as possible. And so if we're just like, we have this idea and we have all these question marks. I just don't want to waste their time and try to get them back. 'Cause we'll need their input later on as well. And to say, well, I don't want to sit through another hour, 2-hour meeting where it was not really that productive, right? So I just want to make sure we're not kind of wasting that opportunity either. So I want to make it as productive as possible.
And I
Does that
promise
make
not to
sense?
make my-
Yeah, I think they get one bite at the apple through a workshop, and then we go
Right.
through this and say, okay, this is it. Now, as a stakeholder, you can make
Yeah.
comments. on it.
Right, participate in the public process.
Right,
yeah.
right. I don't think
Okay.
we need to,
Okay.
cater to them, but I
Right,
think
right, right.
getting their input.
But I want to be able to put something in front of it.
In front of them that
say,
makes sense.
Oh, okay,
Yeah.
so they can respond to it rather than just a lot of question marks and then it gets crafted and they're like, well, this is new. Right, when they're responding to comments in front of the ordinance committee or whoever with the public hearings happen later on.
So what, I mean, obviously, we're here to support you.
Yeah, I'm looking the first full week of December, I feel like feels just to avoid holidays and kind of hopefully hit that spot between Thanksgiving and Christmas feels more doable and less rushed so that we will have a good productive discussion with those stakeholders. So it's looking like the week of December 6th.
Okay, so then we build out percentages and we build out the statement and we work on an impact fee.
Yeah.
And kind of build all those structures and then present it as a workshop to the developers to say, now we want your feedback on this. And we're here to answer your questions. We'll give you, our opinions. And then ultimately, it's an advisory group. So no decision is made. We're just getting information from them.
Right.
Yeah.
And then we could take that information, do whatever we need to do for revisions, if we even need to make anything, and then send it to long-range planning for their oversight on land use, and then it'll come back to us. We'll go do whatever drafting or edits we need to do. It goes to the ordinance committee, and there it's gonna take 3, 4, 5 months to get through. So we're looking this time next year. I'd rather it be a year than a year and a half, but a year seems so, the way Scarborough's going, just seems like we're gonna miss so many opportunities, but that's the process.
And I would say in your position on the planning board, you can still be planting those seeds and asking, I mean, we don't have no teeth to require them to do this stuff, but at least putting it out there
If we
as.
could end the meeting, get it through a meeting before 10:30, I would bring it up during planning board member comments to say, hey, I just given you a heads up of what sustainability is doing. I will do that.
Well, is that to David's point, was that where you were originally heading, was looking at maybe some kind of statement out there that's official from this group so that it could help support, say, planning or zoning board or whoever council knows that this is the direction you guys are headed, and maybe that helps support Rick or other planning board members that are saying, oh, okay. So it's maybe not just Rick at the planning board saying, have you looked at EV chargers? It could be, this is something.
It could be at the transportation committee,
Yeah.
they could have
Yeah.
something to chew on too and support the ordinance.
That's true too. We have 2 members.
And they're on the planning board
Transportation
too.
on the planning board as well. Yep. And we are meeting next week.
So you can plant a seed.
I can do that. I will do that.
And then maybe they want to be invited to that workshop with the developers. I don't see where we couldn't do that, and we could open it up to any long-range planning member that wants to participate, attend. Again, it's advisory. It's just letting them do a dump on us.
Are impact fees universal or expected by the developers?
Oh, yeah, there's all kinds of different impact fees.
But are they part of every project? I'm wondering if,
Darn
And this
close.
one would be an in lieu fee. So instead of meeting kind of the standard, they could pay to opt out.
okay, so this is a philosophical point maybe. If we offer an opt-out fee to somebody who doesn't want to build a swing set, we get money and we can build a swing set in another park. If somebody pays to opt out of parking lot conduit, we can't go into their parking lot and build conduit.
But we could elsewhere.
So what we do
But
right
that
now,
doesn't help the parking spaces in the apartment.
Yeah, it's a lost opportunity.
but it could be that you're looking at, say, the Route 1 corridor is an avenue that we need to have more EV chargers, and we find public land to put those on, or things like that.
Or we're
that we
thinking
could
about maybe our
invest.
beaches, public
beaches,
parking
yeah.
at the beaches and things like that. So we
So we
make
could invest it in other locations. We kind of do that with our sidewalk in Lucy. It's a
Yeah.
special account set up by council. Council needs to set it to authorize that. there is one for our sidewalks at multimodal. And if people don't want to build a sidewalk, they put it in there. It doesn't mean that we're building a sidewalk in front of their property. It means we could be building it here on the municipal campus or at the beaches or where other places that we want to connect the network. It's about more about as a community-wide connecting that network. And so the same thing could be true for EV chargers. It's not putting it here,
I
but it's
guess-
for the greater good, for where it makes the most sense for the overall network.
I get that point. But the charging capability where cars are parked overnight is, it feels like a different thing.
Yeah, I feel like the opt-out should be super high or on,
But you're saying for like residential or
Yeah.
overnight.
And the opt-out, can you split that? Can you have a commercial opt-out and not have the option of an opt-out for a residential?
You could, I mean, you're allowed to write anything you want, and they have to follow it, right? You could.
I feel like it's really short-sighted.
Maybe the developers will say, well, we don't need an opt-out fee, this is reasonable.
I was thinking of offering them something so reasonable that that's what they would say, which is the minimum standard, which is while you've got the trench open, put the conduit in.
Yeah, and I think there could be varying impact fees based on the categories. I still think we need to have those 3 categories or 3 columns, because just putting conduit is not going to transform the marketplace. We have to start telling people that even if that charger never gets used, the fact that there's a charger there that could be of convenience for that one person, he'll buy an EV. It just becomes,
You need to normalize it.
you know, it's like your cell phone. You want to go to the one that has the most range, right? So you look on the United States map and says, well, AT&T covers this area. Well, oh, I like that. It's just the assurance.
So next steps, I'll work on updating the table. I'm gonna go back and rewatch all of this discussion since we are kind of all over the place, and work on drafting the policy memo, and it will be sent out to you all before the next meeting so that we can
Awesome.
have a discussion of that. Also, I'll reach out to Karen at Sedco, and kind of get her pulled into this process so that we can start planning the kind of stakeholder workshop.
That's a
or
great person to do, because she can actually, she works with these developers and she could say, come on, this is, this
Yeah.
is not a big deal.
Yeah.
If you want to come to Scarborough, we're here to support you, but
Well, and I mean, in Portland, it's 20% EV installed, EV chargers installed in all of their parking lots. So I
How
think
many?
that 20% of all parking.
of all
spaces.
parking spots, but they're all 100% capable.
They're all installed. 20% need to have chargers based on Portland's design.
Yes,
technical
right,
design.
that's part of that category, but bottom line is someday every parking spot from here on out could be charging a
And one of the
vehicle.
things, we were talking about the Portland that it's not an ordinance, it's in their technical manual, so I don't know how much it's followed. So that's the other question, is seeing how it's gonna get implemented. I know it's new or new-ish, so I'm kind of curious as it goes to planning board, if they're really gonna hold that or not, because it has more flexibility. It's not an ordinance.
Yeah, so putting it in an ordinance really gives it teeth.
Yeah, so we're in a different place, and
Yeah,
so I
that's a
guess
good point to
I
make.
don't wanna
didn't know
make
that.
sure we're not comparing apples to oranges here, because what Portland is doing is, yes, they're going high, setting a high bar, but I don't know how much it'll be implemented.
There's not a compliance
Whereas we're
factor.
gonna be, yep, this is the
Yeah.
ordinance, this is what you follow.
I like
and it's
the direction
enforcement.
we're going.
Yeah, yep.
All right. So,
That's fun, that's fun. I love to hear everybody's perspective, but, we'll beat each other up and get nowhere. We need advisory
yeah, I
data.
think that'll be helpful. So we have a couple minutes for updates. If, Jean Marie, if you have a town council update to share.
No, you guys discussed the solar, so I think we're good on that. How's that? Short and easy.
How about the ordinance committee? I know you sit on that as chair.
I'm chair.
What does your committee's future look like in terms of business?
we're booked right up through December at this point.
So if we book you in January, can you be ready in January for this?
I don't know if I'll be chair at that point. Remember, we have a new election in November, so God only knows who's gonna be what, but
We'll know in November, so then we can
Yeah.
court in December and say, be ready in January. All right.
I mean, you can start putting that out there for sure.
Once we have a policy, that would be awesome to be able to start planting seeds.
Right.
All right.
Planning board?
I talked about that. We did a neat kind of a project yet, Monday too. Shucks Lobster is proposing a building in the Innovation District, and their process for taking the shell off lobster meat is like cutting edge and is a model that is being looked at around the country. And I didn't know this, but the gentleman who owns this process and everything stated that according to PETA, which is the animal rights, they selected that process as the most humane process for lobsters. Not dunking in hot water or, suffocating them or however people do it. I thought that was an interesting point. So I'm kind of excited about this project. The Downs is, the Innovation District is just about all committed. Well, they say that there's still some pretty good lots that maybe they know, but they haven't shared that, but they're moving really quickly. The planning board is probably getting a little bit, at least from my perspective, I'm gritting my teeth because we have no vision of what this downtown, and now we're creeping right up to that. And to date, all we've done is housing, and then we have the Innovation District, and it's getting to the point where if we see another housing thing come in from that, and we haven't got a master plan and a concept for downtown, it's not sitting well, at least with this planner.
How about a rec center? Did they ever decide?
Well, that was, that's a time where the town could have done something, but opted because of COVID and financial, because if the town did something, it would have to go to the voters. And that would go on referendum. So it could still be a private venture, absolutely. But I don't know about the private public aspect of that. That's up in the air. Of course, taxpayers are going to be asked about the field. So that's probably on some minds. But I think that committee has sunsetted, right?
The downtown?
The athletic field or the athletic
Oh,
committee, the one that was looking at that.
Oh, the community center?
Yeah, the community center
Yeah.
subcommittee.
The downtown, I'm sorry to interrupt, the downtown committee just
They
had
do a
its
report.
last meeting and they've got a report coming out. I'm talking off the top of my head here. I want to say that they're bringing their report to the council in the next council meeting or two. Tom would know.
Because that will help planning. I know some other members have said that they just, we've got the live and we got the innovation, but we don't have supporting that infrastructure with businesses. And we really need that.
Has there been any?
Right, and to be honest with you, the developers are putting forward that they want to put in, now, don't quote me, I know I'm going on TV here, that they want 1,000 more housing units in conjunction with developing the so-called downtown. And I've already, I can tell you from my own perspective, I've already pushed back on that. Because it's a chicken and an egg thing for them. Well, who's going to support the businesses if we don't have a lot of people living downtown? But I made the argument, well, wait a minute, I thought you guys had a full innovation district here, almost full. There are all those employees, they're going to be looking for coffee shops and restaurants and whatever. So let's, so there's more coming from that. The council, we're looking at hiring our own consultant to talk to us about, the upside downside of how to work with the CEA and TIF and whatnot, with the Downs as far as housing and chickens and eggs. So there you go.
vision would be helpful. That's,
Yeah, I think, and it's not, I will say other planning board members have voiced this, and I know the response in the public meeting, I know Rocky has responded with the units that are going in now, the town center residential and the phase one. Their consultants are telling them that that's too far away from the downtown, so that doesn't count towards their units they need to support the downtown, which I think, I know Jen Ladd is on transportation and it's very much about walkable, bikeable, sustainable kind of neighborhoods, and I think has countered that in the planning board setting and saying, no, I think people living in this area are gonna walk to downtown. So I think you're seeing, to your point, Rick, I think everyone's very anxious to see this kind of master plan and where it fits.
because they're way ahead.
Yeah.
They've even admitted it. They're way ahead of what their benchmarks were. And so being that far ahead and not having a comprehensive master plan for this now downtown area. But in fairness, the committee's still meeting and making their recommendations, and you've been part of that exchange. So that's been nice that they've invited Jamie to be part of that downtown committee to make sure that our energy plan and the comp plan and our elements in the comp plan are being thought of.
Just out of curiosity, has there been any conversation or anything that you've heard about the Beach Ridge Speedway, about that route sale? Because that's,
About what that will become?
yeah.
Or-
what-
I can speak to that. Because I've been getting the phone calls and the emails and the this and the that and all the rumors. And if you heard my counselor comments at the end of the last meeting, I took people to task. It's zoned light industrial. Bottom line, full stop, no housing, no residential. So I want people to stop freaking out about that. It's my understanding that there's a developer or developers who, and again, this is what I've heard. I don't know this for a fact. And I've heard this out in the real estate world that there's one or two developers who have the land under contract and are in the process of doing their due diligence. And what will come of that? Rumor has it warehouse distribution. I don't know. But bottom line is no housing. So I just want to squash that real fast.
Could be those developers that now own it could say, well, we don't know really what we want to do. So for the next 20 years, a solar guy wants to put in a solar field. Hey, okay, we'll lease the land to him and he can make some money and.
No, no, that ain't happening. They're moving forward on, no, they're moving. It's not the best use of that land. I got news.
Oh, we're not the ones that own it. We're not the ones that own it.
If I owned it, man, I wouldn't be putting a solar field. It's worth a hell of a lot more with warehousing and distribution or something else on it. So that's my opinion.
Yeah, but the zoning could always be changed by the council, right?
So there's no.
Ain't happening.
No rumbling on a contract zone or anything like that.
Not as of now. I'm telling you, there's nothing concrete has come. Right now it's still in the, it's a private real estate deal. And if you own land, you have the right to sell to whomever you want. And people have the right to develop their land however they want, as long as they follow local ordinances and laws and whatever. So it's not our job to get involved at this point. We won't get involved as a town until someone brings something forward. So there you go.
I'm sure Karen's in communications.
I was just curious.
Yeah, good question.
I'm almost sorry that I even.
Well, you have to understand, Anton, that it's like I've even had someone approach me about making it a historic site because Beach Ridge has such a long history with the town. So, whatever. But, it has become a wicked hot button issue for a certain segment of the town. So
I think the buzzword is the light industrial, and that takes some of the freakiness out. Everybody's thinking and
Right.
dreadfully thinking more housing.
right.
And That's not
And
permitted.
higher taxes and all of this, so, yeah.
Well, entertaining, to say the least.
All right.
Anything else we could do for you?
Oh, no, I've got enough. Thanks.
Okay, well, no, for you. We wouldn't assign
No,
anything.
to you.
Well, with that, the next meeting in 4 weeks.
Yep, the October 27th, I think, is our date. Yep, October 27th.
And so let's drill down into our points on the ordinance, and that way we can go forth to stakeholders. Love it.
Good.
Thank you very much, everyone.
All right.
Motion to adjourn. We don't need roll call, do we?
No.
Aye.
Bye, all.
Thank you, folks.